Now, controversial and shocking, and any other buzzword you can think of, can be attributed to many films. However, there is, in my opinion, a disparity between a good shocking film and a bad one. And I'd like to go over the good and the bad films. Now, I'm obviously haven't seen every good or bad, gory, disturbing film, and thus I'm going to look over at the ones I have seen. Now, to me, a bad, shocking, controversial film is the one that isn't really trying to say anything. Whether it be the usual Serbian film, Hannibal Holocaust, which is just disturbing basically for no reason, and really don't have a point. And if they do, it gets ruined by making the films unwatchable. Like, for example, Pink Flamingos. Now, I like John Waters and think he has made some great films in the past. However, even he admits that he kind of made this film to shock people, thus the film being what it is. The next type of bad controversial film is the ones that are wasted potential. A good example for me is the 1995 film Kids, which to me I think could have been a great film if the writer Harmony Korine wasn't so mean-spirited. Now I know that's kind of the point of the film, but it kind of just feels as though it's a pointless film, as the characters basically just get away with everything without much backlash, only really the ending flashback scene suggesting the impact on their life choices and nothing really else. This is made even worse by his next film, Gummo, which literally had no point to it, and feels very just pretentious and art house for the sake of art house. Which is sad, as Harmony has shown when he wants to, which is very rarely, he can make a good film like Spring Breakers. Same can be said, in my opinion, for the Saw franchise. Now, the first film, while not a masterpiece, is quite a well-made, small-budget film. However, afterward, it just got gory for the sake of gory, and just got worse each and every time, only really being watchable for the performance of Tobin Bell, who really carries the films quite a lot. Now, good shocking films are quite hard to do as you have to shock your audience while still being very good, and the shock factor not being the main draw. I think the best controversial film of all time, in my opinion, is Clockwork Orange, as it's able to be shocking while successfully try to say something. Whether Alex being a victim of his surroundings and Ludovico technique, or whether he was playing victim the whole time. In order to get more sympathy, due to the black comedy element, it really helps the film, as it's able to get and show you immediately why Alex is the way he is, due to the disturbed, cartoonish people around him like Mr. Deltoid.
You are now a murderer, little Alex. A murderer.
And because of that fact, the film's influence is still felt in the sense people are inspired by the film's clothes or soundtrack, and not the violence-istic elements of it. Just look at its influence on the glam rock and fashion in general. This shocking nature can also be the key to getting your point across. Like, for example, the 1985 Belarusian war movie Come and See, which is possibly the greatest anti-war film ever made, and is renowned for its disturbing, unflinching nature, which it had to do as the director showing us a side of World War II that is often not talked about. It's not talked about due to being the Russians' perspective. And because of this, the show shows effectively the horrors of war and condemns in some way both sides for their brutality, all brought tighter by a superb central performance and simple but effective cinematography. The final example I'd like to look at is from Japanese cinema, specifically Battle Royale, which I think is a great example of an allegory. Now, Japanese cinema can be, much like Western cinema and the rest of the world, very shocking and unsettling. From All About Lily Choo Choo, which is disturbing in its almost grounded violence, to Edge of the Killer, which violence is so over the top and goofy it becomes almost funny, or the film Audition, in which it can be seen as a feminist horror masterpiece or a critique of the feminist movement for all its flaws. And Battle Royale sticks out as one of the most obvious as to what it's an allegory for, that being Japanese society, which I think is made quite obvious throughout the film, with the director literally stating he wanted to direct the film due to trauma and memories he has of World War II, and his distrust of the government. Thus, his interest in making the film given the Japanese government in the film also being totalitarian. And the film can be read as a reaction to youth violence at the time, which started to increase at the time due to Japan's lost decade and the peak of the colour gangs in the country. Thus the film's violence, which is both comedic and disturbing. And the film, I think, uses the violence as a metaphor for Japanese society, in a sense it values conformity over individualism. Japan's cutthroat competition to become part of society, not an individual. Thus the winner of the games literally just survives. And the film's ending with Shuya and Noriko on the run, thus you could argue they are hunted for their lack of conformity and their hyper-individualism. The film overall uses violence as a message which director Kenji Fukasaku said you can either take as advice or as a warning. There's one film I'd like to talk about, but only briefly, as I plan on making a video on it in the future, that being the Australian film Snowtown, which I believe you could argue is the most important film of the past few decades, this century even, given its message about social justice, and the film's violence shows you the impact that can happen if social justice goes too far. Now, in conclusion, I think shock factor can work, but you cannot rely on that, and I think you have to have something in order to justify it, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. However, when it does work well, you can truly end with some of the most creative, genius, and masterpieces of filmmaking.